Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you could save your career, or help you destroy someone who deserves it. If you've ever been bullied at work, targeted by a vindictive boss, or watched your dreams get crushed by office politics, this story is for you. Before we begin, I need you to do something. Like this video if you've ever fantasized about revenge at work. Comment below with just the word avalanche if you're ready to hear how one person brought down an entire corporate empire. And share this with anyone who's suffering in silence at their job. They need to hear this. My name is Knight. Not my real name, of course. I chose it because for 7 years, I was anything but. I was 21 when I started at Nexus Financial Corp in Mesquite, Texas, bright-eyed and desperate to prove myself in the corporate world. The gleaming glass towers of our office complex promised opportunity, success, a future. What they delivered was hell dressed in Armani suits and false smiles. Victoria Pemberton was already a vice president when I joined as a junior analyst. 43 years old, Harvard MBA, connections that reached into every corner of the financial industry. She had that particular brand of cruelty that comes wrapped in Southern charm, the kind that makes you question whether the knife in your back was really there or if you were just being too sensitive. The targeting started small, almost imperceptible. A forgotten meeting invitation here, a miscommunicated deadline there. The emotional and psychological consequences of workplace bullying can manifest through increased stress and mental distress, sleep disturbances, depression and anxiety, and I experienced them all. Oh honey, Victoria would coo in her syrupy drawl whenever I'd scramble to explain why I wasn't at a meeting I was never told about. You really need to pay better attention. This kind of carelessness doesn't look good for someone so new. The word new dripped like poison from her lips. Even after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I was always new to her. Always beneath her. Always a target. She had a system, I realized later. A methodical approach to workplace destruction that she'd perfected over her 15-year tenure at Nexus. First, she'd identify threats, usually younger employees who showed too much promise, asked too many questions, or worse, caught the attention of senior leadership. Then came the isolation phase, mysteriously leaving them off important emails, scheduling urgent meetings during their lunch breaks, assigning them to dead-end projects while taking credit for their successes. I watched it happen to others before me. Marcus from Strategic Planning, who quit after 18 months of Victoria's treatment. Sarah from Risk Management, who transferred to the Dallas office just to escape. Tommy from IT, who had a nervous breakdown in the parking garage and never came back. Targets of workplace bullying take an average 7 more sick days per year than those who are not bullied. In a survey of 3,500 people, 20% had taken sick leave as a direct result of bullying, 60% considered leaving, and 15% did leave. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Why? Because I had something none of them knew about. Something that would eventually become my weapon, my shield, and ultimately, Victoria's complete destruction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The pattern of abuse escalated systematically. Victoria would schedule performance reviews at 4:45 p.m. on Fridays, ensuring maximum anxiety over the weekend. She'd accidentally leave me off client dinner invitations, then question my commitment to building relationships. She once made me redo a 200-page financial analysis 7 times, each time claiming she'd given different instructions than she actually had. Knight's work is adequate, she'd say in department meetings, that pause before adequate hanging in the air like a death sentence. Though there's certainly room for improvement in attention to detail. This from the woman who once sent a client proposal with my analysis but her name as the author. My coworkers saw it happening. Some sympathized privately, whispering support in the break room when Victoria wasn't around. But nobody dared stand up to her publicly. She controlled too much: bonus allocations, project assignments, promotion recommendations. Workplace bullies often operate within the established rules and policies of their organizations and society. In most cases, workplace bullying is carried out by someone who is in a position of authority over the victim. The Friday night crying sessions became routine. The Sunday anxiety attacks, predictable. I started keeping a journal, not just for my sanity, but on the advice of someone very special. Someone Victoria had no idea existed in my life. You see, Uncle Marcus wasn't really my uncle. He was my mother's best friend from law school, now a senior partner at Brennan, Fitzgerald & Associates, one of Texas's most feared employment law firms. When I'd first complained about Victoria at a family barbecue 3 years into the job, he'd pulled me aside. Document everything, he'd said quietly, pressing a business card into my hand. Every email, every incident, every witness. Save it all on a personal device, never company property. And Knight? Don't let them see you building your case. The best lawsuits are the ones they never see coming. That conversation changed everything. I wasn't just enduring anymore, I was collecting evidence. Every cruel email went into a private folder. Every witness to Victoria's abuse got quietly noted. Every illegal action she took got meticulously documented. The physical symptoms started in year 4. Migraines that would last for days. Stomach problems that required medication. Insomnia that no amount of melatonin could fix. Workplace bullying was indirectly related to life satisfaction via job-related anxiety and insomnia. My doctor wanted to put me on anxiety medication, but I refused. I needed to stay sharp, needed to remember everything clearly for what was coming. Victoria, meanwhile, grew bolder. She started making comments about my appearance, my personal life, my limitations. It's just that some people are meant for leadership, she said during one particularly brutal performance review, and others are better suited for support roles. There's no shame in accepting your place, Knight. My place. As if she had the right to determine where I belonged in this world. The workspace became a minefield. Victoria would move my desk without warning. I came in one Monday to find all my belongings boxed up and relocated to a cubicle next to the server room, where the constant humming and heat made it impossible to concentrate. When I asked why, she smiled that shark smile of hers. Oh, we needed to make room for the new senior analysts. You understand, don't you? Team players don't complain about where they sit. The new senior analysts were both external hires she'd personally recruited, people with half my experience but twice my salary. One of them, Bradley, was her nephew. The nepotism was so blatant that even HR raised an eyebrow, but Victoria had an explanation for everything. Bradley was uniquely qualified despite his resume showing a mysterious 2-year gap that aligned perfectly with his cocaine rehabilitation stint, a detail I discovered through careful research. Year 5 brought new innovations in her torture techniques. She instituted a peer feedback system where team members would publicly critique each other's work. Somehow, I was always selected to go first, and the feedback was always mysteriously harsh. I later learned she'd been privately instructing others on what to say, threatening their own reviews if they didn't comply. Knight seems to struggle with basic financial concepts, Bradley read from obviously prepared notes during one session, his eyes avoiding mine. This from someone who'd asked me privately to explain what EBITDA meant just the week before. The gaslighting intensified. Victoria would send me emails with instructions, then claim she never sent them when projects went wrong. Thank God for Uncle Marcus's advice about documentation. I had screenshots of everything. She'd approve my time off requests, then mark me as absent without leave when I took them. Each time, she'd act concerned, worried about my reliability issues. I'm just trying to help you succeed, she'd say with fake sincerity. But you're making it very difficult with this pattern of behavior. What pattern? The one she was fabricating with surgical precision? By year 6, organizational change and conflicting demands in the work environment were risk factors for workplace bullying, with dictatorial leadership and lack of procedural justice being significant factors. Victoria had been promoted to senior vice president, giving her even more power to wield against me. She restructured the entire department, naturally, placing me in a role that reported to Bradley, her nephew who'd been with the company less than a year. It's a lateral move, she assured me, though we both knew it was a demotion in everything but name. Bradley will be an excellent mentor for you. Bradley, who couldn't mentor a goldfish to swim. Bradley, who spent most of his time on dating apps and YouTube. Bradley, who called me sweetheart despite my repeated requests to stop. The breaking point was building. 7 years of systematic abuse had worn me down to almost nothing. But almost is the key word there. Because while Victoria thought she was destroying me, I was actually building something she couldn't see, a case so airtight, so devastating, that it would end not just her career but her entire life as she knew it. The journal Uncle Marcus had recommended had grown to over 400 pages of detailed incidents. The email folder contained more than 2,000 pieces of evidence. The secret recordings, yes, Texas is a one-party consent state, captured her making statements that would make any HR department break into a cold sweat. But I needed more than just evidence of bullying. I needed the smoking gun. The thing that would transform this from a hostile work environment case into something that would generate headlines, destroy reputations, and most importantly, trigger the avalanche that would bury Victoria Pemberton forever. And then, as if the universe finally decided to balance the scales, Victoria made her fatal mistake. The morning I discovered my secret weapon, I was hiding in a bathroom stall, trying to stop my hands from shaking. Victoria had just publicly humiliated me in front of the entire Boston office leadership team via video conference, claiming I'd cost the company a major client when in reality, I'd never even been assigned to that account. That's when I got the call that changed everything. Night? It's Marcus. We need to talk. Can you meet me for lunch? Somewhere private. Uncle Marcus never called during work hours unless it was serious. I told Bradley I had a doctor's appointment. He didn't care, too busy swiping through Tinder, and met Marcus at a small Vietnamese restaurant 20 miles from the office. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back booth with a stack of documents that would make my hands shake for an entirely different reason. Your grandmother's estate finally cleared probate, he said without preamble. There were complications we couldn't discuss until now. My grandmother had passed 3 years earlier. I'd assumed her modest estate had been distributed already. She'd lived simply, a retired teacher in a small house in Austin. What I didn't know was that she'd been quietly investing in tech startups since the 1990s, turning her teacher's pension into something extraordinary. How much? I asked, though the number seemed almost irrelevant compared to what it represented. After taxes and distributions to other family members, your trust contains approximately $1.4 million. The layoff came 5 years in, during what her boss described as a downsizing. Translation: she was being replaced by a fresh-out-of-college hire who'd be expected to do the jobs of multiple seasoned employees, but now I had options. Real options. There's more, Marcus continued, sliding a document across the table. Your grandmother apparently knew about your situation at work. She modified her will 2 months before she passed, adding a specific provision. The trust can be used for legal representation in employment matters without counting against your inheritance. Essentially, you have unlimited resources for a lawsuit, and you'd still receive the full $1.4 million. I stared at the papers, understanding finally dawning. Grandmother had been visiting when I'd had one of my worst breakdowns about Victoria. I thought she was just being a sympathetic ear. Instead, she'd been planning my liberation from beyond the grave. She also left you this, Marcus said, pulling out a sealed envelope with my name written in her careful script. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line: no one has the right to dim your light. Burn them down if you have to. Love, Grandma. I started crying right there in the restaurant. But here's the thing about sudden wealth: when you're being systematically destroyed at work, you can't let it show. Any change in my demeanor, lifestyle, or confidence would alert Victoria that something had shifted. So I went back to the office that afternoon and continued playing the victim she expected me to be. The hardest part was not immediately quitting. Every instinct screamed at me to walk into her office, tell her exactly what I thought of her, and leave forever. But Uncle Marcus had different advice. Now that money isn't a factor, we can play the long game, he explained during one of our secret strategy sessions. We're not just going for a settlement. We're going for complete destruction. But that requires patience and planning. So I stayed. I endured. But now, every insult, every humiliation, every act of abuse wasn't breaking me down, it was building my case up. The trust fund meant I could afford the best employment lawyers in the country, private investigators, forensic accountants, whatever it took. But more importantly, it meant I could survive the war that was coming. I started noticing things I'd missed before when survival was my only focus. Victoria wasn't just targeting me, she had a whole system. There were 3 other victims in various stages of her torture program. James in compliance, who'd started showing the same symptoms I'd had in year 2. Rachel in operations, who'd recently been moved to the desk by the server room. And most heartbreakingly, Priya in analytics, a brilliant young woman whose confidence was being systematically destroyed just like mine had been. But Victoria's biggest weakness was her arrogance. She'd gotten away with this for so long that she'd become sloppy. The paper trail she left was extensive. Her email account, which I gained access to through completely legal discovery methods later, contained years of discriminatory comments, illegal instructions to other managers, and most damningly, a folder labeled problem employees with detailed plans for forcing out anyone she saw as a threat. My file in that folder went back to my second week at the company. She'd marked me as a potential problem before I'd even submitted my first report. The reason? I'd corrected a calculation error in one of her presentations during a team meeting. That single moment of competence had marked me for 7 years of hell. The money also allowed me to hire a private investigator, someone Uncle Marcus recommended who specialized in corporate cases. What they uncovered about Victoria was shocking even to me. She'd done this before. At her previous company, she'd driven out 6 employees in 3 years before being quietly let go with a generous severance and a non-disclosure agreement. Nexus Financial never knew because she'd negotiated references that wouldn't mention the personality conflicts that led to her departure. There was more. Victoria was embezzling, nothing massive, just steady skimming from department budgets through false vendor invoices. About $30,000 a year, enough to fund her luxury shopping habit but not enough to trigger automatic audits. She'd been doing it for 5 years, confident that her position made her untouchable. But the real gold was her affair with David Chen, the chief operating officer. Married David Chen. Father of 3 David Chen. David Chen, who was the reason Victoria kept getting promoted despite a trail of destroyed employees in her wake. The investigator had photos, hotel receipts, even recordings from a bar where Victoria had drunkenly bragged about having David wrapped around her finger. Armed with all this information, Uncle Marcus and I refined our strategy. We wouldn't just file a hostile work environment claim. We'd trigger an avalanche, multiple investigations, regulatory complaints, and public exposure that would make Victoria radioactive in the industry. The beautiful thing about avalanches, Marcus explained, is that once they start, they're impossible to stop. We just need to find the right trigger. That trigger came sooner than expected, and from Victoria herself. She'd assigned me to work on the Steinberg Foundation account, a $50 million portfolio that was our department's crown jewel. Of course, she didn't really want me to work on it, she wanted me to fail spectacularly so she'd have cause for termination. What she didn't know was that I'd been secretly studying every aspect of that account for 2 years, preparing for this exact moment. I spent 3 months creating the most comprehensive financial strategy the company had ever seen. I worked nights, weekends, every spare moment. The presentation was 500 pages of brilliance, market analysis, risk assessments, growth projections that would make any client salivate. I documented every hour, every insight, every innovation. And then, the week before the client presentation, Victoria called me into her office. "There's been a change of plans," she said, that familiar predatory smile playing at her lips. "Bradley will be presenting the Steinberg strategy. You'll assist him, of course. Behind the scenes. Where you belong." I knew this was coming. In fact, I'd counted on it. "Of course, Victoria. Should I send Bradley all my files?" "Yes, send everything to Bradley." "And Knight? Make sure you include all your research. We wouldn't want anything missed." I sent Bradley the files. All of them. Including the ones with hidden metadata showing creation dates, edit histories, and most importantly, author information that couldn't be altered. I also sent a copy to my personal attorney, date-stamped and notarized. The presentation to the Steinberg Foundation was scheduled for the following Thursday. Bradley spent the week trying to memorize my work, calling me constantly with questions he should have known the answers to if he'd actually created the strategy. I helped him every time, playing the good soldier, all while documenting every interaction. What none of them knew was that I'd already reached out to Michael Steinberg himself. Not about the presentation, but about a charity golf tournament his foundation was hosting. I'd bought a sponsorship with my newfound wealth, not in my name, but through a shell company Uncle Marcus had helped me set up. As a sponsor, I'd be attending the tournament, the day after the presentation. Everything was in place. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal team was ready. The investigator had everything documented. But I still needed Victoria to make one more mistake, the one that would justify the nuclear option I was about to unleash. And Victoria, predictable in her cruelty, was about to deliver it on a silver platter. The Steinberg presentation was a disaster. Not for the strategy, my work was flawless, but for Bradley's delivery. He stumbled through slides he didn't understand, botched critical calculations when questioned, and at one point, actually said "I'll have to get back to you on that" when asked about basic methodology I detailed extensively in the appendix. Victoria jumped in to save him, of course, smoothly taking over and presenting my work as if she'd been intimately involved from the beginning. The Steinberg team seemed satisfied enough, though I caught Michael Steinberg himself frowning at several points. That afternoon, Victoria called a department meeting. I knew what was coming. She needed to control the narrative before anyone started asking why Bradley had performed so poorly. I want to congratulate Bradley on his exceptional work on the Steinberg presentation, she began, and I felt my stomach turn. The strategy he developed shows exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need in this department. Bradley had the decency to look uncomfortable, his eyes darting to me briefly before focusing on his phone. However, Victoria continued, and here it came, I'm disappointed in the support level from certain team members. Knight, your assistance to Bradley was minimal at best. In a team environment, we need everyone contributing fully, not just doing the bare minimum. The room went silent. Everyone knew I'd been working on the Steinberg account for months. They'd seen me at my desk until midnight, witnessed me skip lunches to perfect the analysis. James from compliance actually started to speak up, but Victoria shot him a look that could have frozen hellfire. In fact, Victoria said, warming to her theme, I'm concerned about a pattern of underperformance. Knight, I'll need to see you in my office after this meeting. Everyone else, let's celebrate Bradley's success. There's cake in the break room. As people filed out, avoiding eye contact with me, Rachel whispered, this is bullshit, as she passed. Priya squeezed my shoulder. Even Bradley couldn't look at me as he slunk away. 20 minutes later, I sat in Victoria's office as she slid a document across her desk. A performance improvement plan, the corporate kiss of death. This is your final warning, she said, barely containing her satisfaction. 30 days to show marked improvement, or we'll have to terminate your employment. The issues are clearly documented: lack of initiative, failure to support team objectives, and consistent underperformance. I read through the PIP carefully. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction, twisting every achievement into a failure, every success into a disappointment. But she'd made one crucial error. She'd specifically referenced the Steinberg presentation as an example of my failure to contribute to critical projects. I'll need you to sign this to acknowledge receipt, she said. I signed it. Then I asked, very carefully, should I not attend the Steinberg Foundation golf tournament tomorrow? I notice I'm still on the attendee list. Victoria's face went through several expressions before settling on confusion. What golf tournament? The charity tournament. The one our company is sponsoring. I was assigned to attend as the department representative months ago. She hadn't known. In her focus on stealing my work, she'd overlooked this detail. Yes, you should still attend. We need representation there. But Knight? Don't embarrass us. Know your place. That night, I went home and made 3 phone calls. The first to Uncle Marcus, it's time. The second to my investigator, release everything to the contact I gave you. The third to a reporter at the Dallas Business Journal who'd been investigating workplace harassment in financial firms, I have a story for you. Then I opened a bottle of wine, good wine, the kind I could never afford before, and reviewed my files one last time. 7 years of evidence. 3,000 emails. Hundreds of hours of documented abuse. Financial fraud. Sexual misconduct. And now, theft of intellectual property with a paper trail a mile long. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not in my usual conservative suit, but in a new outfit I'd bought specifically for this occasion, designer, perfectly fitted, the kind of power dressing Victoria wore like armor. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in 7 years, myself, undiminished. The Steinberg Foundation golf tournament was held at Brookhaven Country Club, the kind of place where deals worth millions were made over 18 holes. I arrived early, checked in at the sponsor table under my shell company's name, and waited. Victoria arrived an hour later with David Chen and several other executives. She saw me and frowned, started to approach, then noticed who I was talking to, Michael Steinberg himself. The strategy was remarkable, he was saying. Some of the best work I've seen. Your analyst, Knight, was it, has a brilliant mind. I'm sorry, Mr. Steinberg, I said, loud enough for Victoria to hear. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Knight. Michael's eyebrows rose. You're Knight? But yesterday, that young man, Bradley, presented himself as the architect of the strategy. Bradley is a talented presenter, I said diplomatically. He did an excellent job delivering the material. Delivering, yes. But when I asked about the underlying methodology, he seemed lost. Tell me, What made you choose the Morrison model for risk assessment? It's unconventional for this type of portfolio. I launched into a detailed explanation, the kind Bradley couldn't have given if his life depended on it. Michael's eyes lit up with understanding and something else, recognition of what had really happened. Victoria tried to intervene, approaching with her shark smile. Mr. Steinberg. How wonderful to see you. I hope Knight isn't bothering you with technical details. Not at all, Michael said coolly. I was just learning that Knight created the entire strategy Bradley presented yesterday. Fascinating stuff. In fact, I'd like to discuss having Knight lead the account personally. Victoria's face went through a series of micro-expressions that would have been funny if they weren't so satisfying. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Knight is, in a transition period with the company. Oh? Michael's tone could have frozen vodka. What kind of transition? That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Marcus, check your email. Now. I excused myself, stepped away, and opened my phone. The email was from Nexus Financial's Chief Human Resources Officer with the subject line, Urgent, Investigation Initiated, Do Not Discuss. It had begun. What I learned later was that at exactly 9 a.m. that morning, synchronized packages had been delivered to the HR department, the Board of Directors, the SEC, and the Texas Department of Labor. Each package contained a portion of my evidence, carefully curated to trigger different investigations. HR got the hostile work environment documentation. The board got the embezzlement evidence. The SEC got the fraudulent financial reporting. And the Department of Labor got everything about wage theft and illegal termination threats. But the masterstroke was the reporter. The Dallas Business Journal article went live at 9:15 a.m. with the headline, Senior VP at Nexus Financial under investigation for pattern of workplace abuse, financial fraud. It didn't name Victoria specifically, legal reasons, but it didn't need to. Anyone in the industry would know exactly who it was talking about. Back at the golf tournament, Victoria's phone started buzzing. Then David Chen's. Then what seemed like every Nexus Financial executive's phone at once. Victoria's face went from confused to concerned to absolutely ashen as she read whatever was on her screen. She looked at me, and in that moment, she knew. She knew that the mouse she'd been torturing for 7 years had just revealed itself as the cat. You, she breathed, stepping toward me. Me, I confirmed, my voice steady for the first time in 7 years. You don't know who you're messing with. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Michael Steinberg cleared his throat. Ms. Pemberton, I think you should be more concerned about your own career. I've just received some rather disturbing information about the presentation yesterday. It seems the strategy was entirely Knight's work. That's intellectual property theft, is it not? David Chen was already backing away from Victoria, his phone pressed to his ear, probably talking to legal. Furthermore, Michael continued, the Steinberg Foundation has a strict policy about working with companies that engage in discriminatory practices. We'll be reviewing our relationship with Nexus Financial immediately. The Steinberg account, $50 million, potentially gone because of Victoria's actions. That alone would have been enough to end her. But we were just getting started. My phone rang. Uncle Marcus. Knight, you need to leave the tournament now. HR is looking for Victoria, and you don't want to be there when they find her. Get in your car and drive to my office. We have a meeting with Nexus's general counsel in an hour. As I walked to my car, I passed Victoria one last time. She was standing alone, David had disappeared, the other executives had scattered, even Bradley was nowhere to be seen. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a predator that had just realized it was prey. Knight, she called out, and for the first time in 7 years, there was something like fear in her voice. We can work this out. It doesn't have to be like this. I stopped, turned, and looked at the woman who had tortured me for 7 years. Who had stolen my work, destroyed my confidence, made me question my worth as a human being. Yes, I said simply. It does. Then I walked away, leaving her standing alone on the pristine golf course, her phone buzzing incessantly with the sound of her world collapsing. The meeting with Nexus Financial's general counsel was unlike anything I'd experienced in 7 years at the company. Instead of being dismissed, marginalized, or ignored, I was the center of attention. 3 lawyers from the company, 2 from HR, and the chief compliance officer, all hanging on every word, examining every piece of evidence with growing horror. This is comprehensive, the lead counsel said, scrolling through the documentation on his laptop. How long have you been compiling this? 4 years of active documentation, I replied, Uncle Marcus beside me. Though the behavior goes back to my first week at the company. The chief compliance officer, Janet Morrison, whom I'd only seen from a distance at company events, looked physically ill. The embezzlement alone. How did we miss this? Uncle Marcus leaned forward. Because Ms. Pemberton was very careful to stay just under the automatic audit thresholds. And because she had protection from senior leadership. He slid a folder across the table. Specifically, David Chin. The folder contained the photographs and evidence of the affair. Janet's face went from pale to flushed. This explains a lot. The general counsel cleared his throat. Ms. Knight, what are your intentions here? What do you want? I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times with Uncle Marcus. I want Victoria Pemberton terminated for cause immediately. I want a full investigation into everyone who enabled her behavior. I want compensation for 7 years of hostile work environment, stolen work, and emotional distress. And I want protection for the other victims, James, Rachel, Priya, and anyone else she's targeted. The number? The counsel asked. Uncle Marcus named a figure that made everyone in the room flinch. But we both knew they'd pay it. The alternative, a public trial with all this evidence, would cost them far more in reputation and market value. We'll need time to investigate, Janet said. You have 72 hours, Uncle Marcus replied. After that, we file suit. And just so we're clear, the Dallas Business Journal article this morning is just the beginning. We have relationships with the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and 60 Minutes, all of whom would be very interested in a story about systematic workplace abuse at a major financial firm. While Nexus scrambled to investigate, I returned to the office. Walking through those doors knowing what was happening behind the scenes was surreal. Victoria wasn't there, emergency meetings, according to her assistant, who looked at me with something like awe. Word was already spreading. Bradley found me at my desk. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept. Knight, I need to say something. I waited. I knew it was your work. All of it. She made me take credit, threatened my job if I didn't. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and showed me an email from Victoria explicitly instructing him to present my work as his own. I forwarded this to HR this morning. I'm probably going to be fired, but I couldn't keep being part of this. You should have stood up to her months ago, I said. I know. I'm a coward. But my uncle, she said she'd tell everyone about the rehab, about why I really left my last job. She had dirt on everyone, Knight. That's how she controlled us. This was news. Everyone? Bradley nodded miserably. She has files. Blackmail material. James's bankruptcy, Rachel's husband's criminal record, David Chen's tax issues that she helped him hide. She called it her insurance policy. I immediately texted Uncle Marcus this information. If Victoria had been keeping blackmail files, that was another federal crime to add to the list. That afternoon, an email went out from the CEO, not the usual corporate speak, but a stark announcement, effective immediately, Victoria Pemberton has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Any concerns about departmental management should be directed to Janet Morrison. The office erupted. 7 years of forced silence broke like a dam. People who'd never spoken to me before approached my desk with their own stories. Victoria hadn't just targeted a few of us, she'd created a reign of terror that touched dozens of employees. Sandra from accounting, she made me falsify expense reports. I have copies of everything. Marcus from IT, she had me install monitoring software on people's computers without authorization. I kept logs. Even her own assistant, Patricia, 7 years I've worked for that woman. 7 years of abuse. I have recordings of her saying things that would make your skin crawl. In subreddits like r/anti-work, r/work reform, or r/mildly infuriating, users anonymously share stories of bullying bosses, absurd company policies, and revenge fantasies, often with receipts. But this wasn't online, this was happening in real time, in real life. By day 2 of the investigation, the scope had expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. Victoria hadn't just been a bully, she'd been running what amounted to a criminal enterprise within Nexus Financial. The blackmail, the embezzlement, the systematic destruction of employees who threatened her, it was like a corporate crime syndicate. David Chen tried to distance himself, claiming he had no knowledge of Victoria's activities. But the investigation revealed he'd been actively protecting her, shutting down previous complaints, and directing HR to ignore red flags. His wife was served with divorce papers the same day he was served with termination notice. Apparently, the affair photos had somehow made their way to her attorney. On the morning of day 3, I got a call from Janet Morrison. "Can you come to the executive conference room? Bring your attorney." The room was full when we arrived. The entire board of directors, the CEO, general counsel, and several people I didn't recognize who turned out to be from an external investigation firm. The CEO, Robert Hutchinson, stood when I entered. "Ms. Knight, on behalf of Nexus Financial, I want to personally apologize for what you've endured. The investigation has revealed systemic failures at every level of management. We failed you, and we failed our obligation to provide a safe workplace." The apology was nice, but Uncle Marcus and I were there for more than words. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," the general counsel said, sliding a document across the table. The number was even higher than we'd asked for. "This includes compensation for lost wages, emotional distress, and punitive damages. We're also offering you the position of Senior Director of Financial Strategy, reporting directly to the C-suite, with a 40% salary increase." I looked at Uncle Marcus, who nodded slightly. "We'd discussed this possibility." "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I have conditions." Robert leaned forward. "We're listening." "First, every person Victoria targeted gets a similar review of their compensation and career trajectory, with appropriate adjustments. Second, Nexus implements mandatory management training on workplace harassment, conducted by an external firm of my choosing. Third, the company establishes an anonymous whistleblower system that bypasses management entirely. And fourth, this entire incident is documented in the company's public filings, not hidden behind NDAs and quiet settlements." The board members exchanged glances. This last requirement was huge. It would affect stock prices, reputation, everything. "If we agree to this," Robert said slowly, "you'll sign a non-disparagement agreement?" "No," I said firmly. "I'll agree not to actively pursue media coverage, but I won't be silenced about what happened to me. Other victims need to know they're not alone, that they can fight back." The negotiation continued for 3 hours. In the end, we reached an agreement that satisfied everyone, mostly. Nexus would take the hit publicly but frame it as proactive corporate reform. The other victims would be compensated. And Victoria? Victoria would face the full consequences of her actions. As we finalized the details, the head of the investigation firm pulled me aside. "Ms. Knight, I've been doing this for 20 years. This is the most thoroughly documented case of workplace abuse I've ever seen. Your preparation was remarkable." "I had 7 years to prepare," I replied. "And a grandmother who believed in justice." That evening, I sat in my apartment, my soon-to-be former apartment, since I was already planning my resignation despite the promotion offer, and opened my laptop. The anonymous blog post I'd been drafting for months was ready. Not naming Nexus or Victoria specifically, but detailing the experience in a way that anyone who'd been through similar abuse would recognize. The title, "How to Survive Workplace Bullying, a 7-Year Case Study." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Messages poured in from people around the world with their own stories. Industrial/organizational psychology research has also examined the types of bullying that exist among business professionals and the prevalence of this form of bullying in the workplace, but sometimes the most powerful research comes from lived experience. But the real satisfaction came the next morning when I received a text from James. "Did you see the news?" I turned on the local business channel, and there it was. Victoria Pemberton, being led out of her luxury apartment building in handcuffs. The embezzlement charges had triggered a criminal investigation. The FBI had gotten involved due to the interstate nature of some of the fraudulent transactions. The reporter on scene was the same one from the Dallas Business Journal I'd contacted. Sources indicate that this arrest is just the beginning of a larger investigation into corporate fraud at several major financial firms. The investigation was triggered by a whistleblower who spent years documenting systematic abuse and financial crimes. The camera caught Victoria's face as she was put into the police car. She looked directly at the lens, and for a moment, I could swear she was looking right at me. The expression on her face wasn't anger or hatred, it was recognition. She finally understood that every cruel act, every humiliation, every moment of torture had been building to this moment. But we weren't done yet. Not even close. The criminal arrest was just the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. 3 days after Victoria's arrest, I enacted Phase 2. Remember those blackmail files Bradley had mentioned? During the investigation, Nexus's IT department had found them on Victoria's computer, encrypted, but not well enough to stop motivated forensics experts. The files contained dirt on half the senior leadership at Nexus and several major clients. But here's the interesting part, keeping those files was a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes, actually. Extortion, blackmail, conspiracy. The FBI agent assigned to the case told me they'd never seen anything quite like it in a corporate setting. She documented her own crimes, Agent Sarah Coleman said, shaking her head. Every threat, every payoff, every piece of leverage. It's like she was building a prosecution case against herself. The files also revealed something unexpected. Victoria wasn't working alone. She had a network of similar predators across multiple companies, sharing information, protecting each other, moving from firm to firm when things got too hot. They called themselves the Board. How's that for corporate dystopia? I provided Agent Coleman with everything I had, including recorded conversations where Victoria had mentioned her friends in high places. The FBI investigation expanded exponentially. Within a week, arrests were being made at firms across Texas, New York, and California. Meanwhile, at Nexus, the housecleaning was brutal and swift. David Chen was terminated for cause, losing his $3 million severance package. 6 other executives who'd enabled Victoria's behavior were either fired or encouraged to resign. The entire HR department was restructured. But the real revenge came in a form Victoria never expected, her victims finding their voices. I organized a meeting, nothing official, just dinner at a restaurant downtown. I invited everyone I knew Victoria had targeted over the years. To my surprise, 23 people showed up. Some still worked at Nexus, others had left years ago, but all carried scars from their time under Victoria's reign. I thought I was the only one, said Marcus, the former strategic planning Marcus, not Uncle Marcus, who'd left the company 5 years earlier. I thought I was weak, that I couldn't hack it in corporate finance. I've been in therapy for 3 years because of what she did to me. Sarah, who'd transferred to Dallas, nodded. She told me I was too stupid to succeed, that I should be grateful for any job at all. I believed her. I almost quit finance entirely. As we shared stories, a pattern emerged. Victoria had specifically targeted high performers, people with potential who might threaten her position. She'd identified us early, isolated us, and then systematically destroyed our confidence. Not only may emotional intelligence assist in handling exposure to workplace bullying, but exposure to workplace bullying may impede emotional intelligence via psychological distress. We should sue, someone suggested. Together. A class action. Uncle Marcus, who I'd invited as my +1, smiled. Actually, that's already in motion. Nexus has agreed to a settlement fund for all of Victoria's victims. But there's something else you all should know. He explained that Victoria's personal assets, her luxury condo, her investment accounts, her precious art collection, were being seized under asset forfeiture laws related to the embezzlement charges. The proceeds would be distributed to her victims as restitution. How much are we talking about? Priya asked. Between the settlement fund and the asset forfeiture? About $15 million to be divided among all victims, proportional to documented damages. The room went silent. For some of us, this money would be life-changing. For others, it was vindication worth more than any dollar amount. But I had one more card to play. There's something else, I said, pulling out my laptop. Victoria kept detailed records of her methods, like a playbook for workplace predators. I think we should publish it. Publish it? James asked. Not as an instruction manual, but as a warning. A guide for recognizing and documenting workplace abuse. We turn her weapon into a shield for future victims. Everyone agreed. We spent the next month collaborating on what would become the Predator's Playbook, a survivor's guide to recognizing and defeating workplace bullies. It went viral on LinkedIn within days of publication, shared by HR professionals, executives, and workers worldwide. The TIAA Bank Center is the largest office building in downtown Jacksonville, and ironically, that's where Victoria's final humiliation would take place. The Nexus Financial Board had called a company-wide meeting to address the scandal. Every employee in the building, plus video links to offices worldwide, would be watching. Robert Hutchinson, the CEO, didn't mince words. "We failed you. We created an environment where a predator could thrive for years, destroying careers and lives. This ends now." He outlined the new policies, the settlement fund, the termination of everyone who'd enabled Victoria. Then he did something unexpected. "I want to invite Knight to speak. Knight, would you please come to the podium?" I hadn't prepared anything, but I stood and walked to the front of the auditorium. Looking out at hundreds of faces, many of whom had witnessed my humiliation over the years, I spoke from the heart. 7 years ago, I walked into this building full of hope and ambition. Victoria Pemberton tried to kill that hope. She almost succeeded. But what she didn't understand is that cruelty creates evidence. Every email she sent, every witness to her abuse, every document she falsified, it all became part of the case against her. I paused, seeing nods throughout the audience. If you're being bullied, document everything. If you see someone being bullied, speak up. And if you're in a position of power and you're allowing it to happen, know this: we're not suffering in silence anymore. We're taking notes, keeping records, and waiting for our moment. Victoria thought she was untouchable. As of this morning, she's facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation. But I wasn't done. "I'm resigning from Nexus Financial, effective immediately. Not because of the company's response now, which has been appropriate, but because I need to build something new. With the settlement funds and my own resources, I'm starting a nonprofit dedicated to helping workplace abuse victims document their experiences and connect with legal resources. Victoria Pemberton created dozens of victims. We're going to create thousands of survivors." The announcement of my resignation and the nonprofit made business news that afternoon. By evening, I'd received dozens of emails from attorneys offering pro bono services, therapists volunteering their time, and victims wanting to share their stories. But the sweetest revenge came in the form of a video that Priya sent me that night. Someone had recorded Victoria being served with additional charges at her bail hearing. The federal prosecutor was reading the counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, extortion, conspiracy to commit blackmail, interstate commerce violations. Victoria's attorney tried to argue for continued bail, but the judge cut him off. "Ms. Pemberton has resources hidden offshore, connections throughout the industry, and a demonstrated pattern of intimidating witnesses. Bail is revoked. The defendant will remain in custody until trial." The look on Victoria's face as they led her away in shackles, orange jumpsuit replacing her designer suits, terror replacing her smug superiority, was 7 years of therapy in a single moment. The trial of Victoria Pemberton became must-watch TV for anyone in corporate America. Court TV carried it live, calling it "The Devil Wears Prada meets the Wolf of Wall Street." Every day brought new revelations that made headlines across the business world. Week 1 revealed the extent of the embezzlement: $400,000 over 6 years, hidden through a complex web of shell companies and false invoices. The prosecutor, ADA Jennifer Martinez, methodically presented evidence that Victoria had created an entire fictional vendor company, complete with fake employees and tax filings. The defendant didn't just steal money, Martinez told the jury. She created an elaborate criminal enterprise within Nexus Financial, using her position to terrorize employees who might discover her crimes. Week 2 focused on the extortion and blackmail. The prosecution presented Victoria's insurance files, hundreds of documents containing personal information she'd used to control employees and clients. One particularly damning piece of evidence was an email where Victoria explicitly threatened to expose a client's son's drug arrest unless they moved their portfolio to her management. The defense tried to paint Victoria as a tough but effective manager in a cutthroat industry. Her attorney, the renowned Michael Rothstein, argued that the financial irregularities were accounting errors and the insurance files were simply due diligence research. Then I took the stand. For 2 days, I walked the jury through 7 years of systematic abuse. I presented emails, recordings, documents, a mountain of evidence that showed not just workplace bullying but calculated psychological torture designed to protect criminal activity. "Can you explain this email to the jury?" ADA Martinez asked, displaying a message Victoria had sent after I'd questioned a suspicious invoice. I read it aloud. "Knight, your inability to understand basic financial processes is becoming a liability. Perhaps we should discuss whether this role exceeds your capabilities. I'd hate to have to provide an honest reference to future employers about your performance issues." What did you understand this to mean? Martinez asked. She was threatening to destroy my career if I kept questioning the fraudulent invoices. The cross-examination was brutal. Rothstein tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge for legitimate performance management. But Uncle Marcus had prepared me well. Isn't it true you're now wealthy? Rothstein asked, trying to imply I had motivation to lie. Yes, I inherited money from my grandmother. And isn't it true you used that money to hire private investigators to dig into Ms. Pemberton's personal life? I hired investigators to document ongoing workplace crimes. They found evidence of embezzlement, extortion, and fraud. Are you suggesting I should have ignored criminal activity? I'm suggesting you had a vendetta. Mr. Rothstein, I had evidence. There's a difference. The jury seemed to agree. But the real bombshell came when Bradley testified as a prosecution witness. He'd made a deal, full cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution for his minor role in the presentation theft. Bradley revealed something even I hadn't known: Victoria had been planning to frame me for the embezzlement. She showed me falsified documents with Knight's signature, Bradley testified, visibly shaking. She said if the embezzlement was ever discovered, she'd blame Knight. She'd been setting it up for years, creating a paper trail that would point to Knight. She called it her exit strategy. The courtroom gasped. I felt Uncle Marcus's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Victoria had been planning to destroy not just my career but my freedom. The prosecution presented the fake documents, expertly forged signatures, backdated emails created using sophisticated software, even a Swiss bank account opened in my name that Victoria controlled. If she hadn't been caught, if I hadn't documented everything, I could be the one on trial. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. Patricia, Victoria's former assistant, revealed that Victoria had a hidden recording system in her office. She'd been secretly recording conversations for years, planning to use them as additional blackmail material. Did you ever hear Miss Pemberton discuss her plans regarding Knight? Martinez asked. Patricia nodded. She said Knight was too smart for her own good and needed to be put down like a rabid dog. The defense objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard Victoria's true nature in her own words. The trial lasted 3 weeks. During that time, the business world watched as the full extent of Victoria's crimes unfolded. The board network she belonged to unraveled, with arrests in 7 states. 63 executives across 15 companies were implicated in various schemes. The FBI called it the largest corporate bullying and fraud ring ever uncovered. A nurse recently won a $41 million jury verdict in her discrimination and wrongful termination lawsuit against Kaiser Permanente, but Victoria's case would set new precedents for criminal prosecution of workplace bullying. The media coverage was relentless. The Wall Street Journal ran a series on toxic leadership in finance. Forbes published The Victoria Pemberton Effect: How One Case Changed Corporate Culture. Harvard Business Review dedicated an entire issue to workplace predators and organizational blindness. Meanwhile, Victoria's personal life imploded spectacularly. Her husband of 15 years filed for divorce the day after her arrest, claiming he'd been unaware of her activities. Her country club revoked her membership. Her charity boards expelled her. Even her own family distanced themselves. Her sister gave an interview to 60 Minutes disavowing Victoria's actions. She was always cruel, her sister said. Even as a child, she enjoyed making others suffer. We thought she'd grown out of it. We were wrong. But the true extent of Victoria's downfall became clear when her assets were liquidated. The $3 million condo, the art collection, the jewelry, the cars, everything was sold at auction. The proceeds, nearly $5 million after legal fees, went into the Victim Restitution Fund. I attended one of the auctions, watching as Victoria's prized possessions were sold to strangers. Her beloved Hermes bag collection, which she'd often flaunted at the office, went for a fraction of their original price. The buyer? Rachel from operations, who planned to donate them to a women's shelter. She used to make comments about my knockoff purses, Rachel said, holding up a $30,000 Birkin bag. Said they showed I didn't belong in corporate finance. Well, Victoria, who doesn't belong now? The criminal verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. 27 federal charges including wire fraud, embezzlement, extortion, conspiracy, and racketeering. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. Ms. Pemberton, you weaponized the corporate environment to satisfy your greed and sadism. You destroyed careers, damaged lives, and corrupted entire organizations. You showed no mercy to your victims, and thus deserve none yourself. I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are permanently barred from holding any fiduciary position and must pay $7.3 million in restitution to your victims. Victoria collapsed when the sentence was read. For the first time in 7 years, I saw her cry. But they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of rage that her perfect world had been destroyed. As they led her away, she looked directly at me. "You ruined me," she mouthed. "No," I said quietly, knowing she could read my lips. "You ruined yourself. I just documented it." 6 months after Victoria's sentencing, I stood in front of a room full of survivors at the inaugural summit of the Phoenix Foundation, the nonprofit I'd founded with my inheritance and settlement money. The name was deliberate, we were all rising from the ashes of workplace trauma. The summit was held at the Hyatt Regency in downtown Jacksonville, making us the largest meeting facility in Northeast Florida with 116,000 square feet of event space. We'd expected maybe 100 attendees. Over 500 people showed up, with thousands more streaming online from around the world. "Welcome, Phoenixes," I began, looking out at faces that reflected every emotion from hope to lingering pain. 6 months ago, Victoria Pemberton was sentenced to 18 years in prison. But this isn't about her anymore. This is about us, the survivors who refused to let workplace predators define our futures. The foundation had already helped 300 people document workplace abuse, connected 150 with pro bono legal representation, and secured settlements totaling $30 million. But more importantly, we'd created a community where victims could become survivors, and survivors could become advocates. The keynote speaker was unexpected, Robert Hutchinson, the CEO of Nexus Financial. He'd asked to speak, to publicly take responsibility for the organizational failures that had enabled Victoria. "I've been a CEO for 20 years, he said. "I thought I was a good leader because our numbers were strong. But I was blind to the suffering in my own organization. Night opened my eyes not just to Victoria's crimes, but to my own complicity through inaction. Nexus has committed $10 million to the Phoenix Foundation as partial atonement for our failures." The announcement drew gasps and applause. That funding would allow us to expand nationally, opening offices in 10 major cities. During lunch, I was approached by someone I didn't recognize, a young woman who introduced herself as Amanda. "You don't know me," she said, "but I was Victoria's target at her previous company. When I saw the news about her arrest, I literally cried for an hour. For 10 years, I thought I was crazy, that I'd imagined how bad it was. Your blog post saved my sanity." Stories like Amanda's had been pouring in for months. Victoria had left a trail of destruction spanning decades and multiple companies. We were documenting it all, creating a database of predatory patterns that researchers and HR professionals could use to identify toxic leaders before they caused damage. Marcus, Strategic Planning Marcus, had joined the foundation as our Director of Survivor Services. "I spent 5 years in therapy thinking I was weak," he told the summit audience. "Now I help others recognize that surviving workplace abuse takes incredible strength. We're not weak, we're warriors." The summit featured panels on recognizing abuse, documentation strategies, legal rights, and recovery. But the most powerful session was the survivor testimonials. James from compliance stood up first. "Victoria made me believe I was incompetent. I almost quit finance entirely. Now I'm the chief compliance officer at a Fortune 500 company. The best revenge isn't just success, it's preventing others from suffering what we endured." Rachel had started her own consulting firm. "Victoria said I'd never amount to anything. My firm now has 12 employees and 3 major corporate clients. Oh, and we have a strict anti-bullying policy that would make Victoria's head explode." Priya had perhaps the most poetic revenge. "I'm now a senior VP at Nexus Financial, Victoria's old position, actually. I sit in her former office. And I've made it my mission to create the exact opposite of her legacy. My team has the highest satisfaction scores in the company." Bradley spoke too, though his journey was different. "I was complicit. I let fear turn me into an enabler. I'm here to apologize and to warn others, if you see abuse and stay silent, you're part of the problem. I'm in therapy, working on being better. And I volunteer with the foundation to help identify and reform enablers like I was." The summit made national news. The New York Times ran a feature, "The Phoenix Rises: How Workplace Abuse Survivors Created a Movement." We were invited to testify before Congress about strengthening workplace protection laws. 3 states introduced Victoria's law, legislation making systematic workplace bullying a criminal offense. But perhaps the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. The Federal Bureau of Prisons reached out. Victoria had requested to speak with me. Uncle Marcus advised against it. "You owe her nothing." But I was curious. What could Victoria possibly have to say? 2 weeks later, I sat in a visitor's room at the Federal Correctional Facility. Victoria entered in an orange jumpsuit, her once perfect hair now gray at the roots, her designer manicure replaced by bare, short nails. She'd aged 10 years and 6 months. "You came," she said, sitting across from me. "I'm curious why you asked." She was silent for a long moment. "I hated you from the moment you walked into Nexus." "I know. The question is why." "You reminded me of myself. Young, brilliant, ambitious. But also kind. People liked you naturally. They never liked me, they feared me or wanted something from me, but they never liked me. So you decided to destroy me?" "I decided to destroy the version of me that could have been. Every time I hurt you, I was hurting the part of myself I'd killed to succeed." She laughed bitterly. "The prison psychologist would be so proud. I'm finally developing insight." "Is this an apology?" "No. I'm not sorry for trying to succeed in a system that rewards predators. I'm only sorry I got caught." She leaned forward. "But I'll tell you something, Knight. There are hundreds more like me out there. Thousands. You caught one. The system creates us, rewards us, protects us. Your little foundation is admirable, but you're fighting human nature." "No," I said, standing to leave. "I'm fighting people who use that excuse to justify cruelty." "Goodbye, Victoria." "Wait," she called out. "Will you visit again?" "No." "Why did you come this time then?" I turned back. "To see if there was any humanity left in you worth saving." "There isn't." As I walked out of the prison, I felt the last chains of the past 7 years fall away. Victoria was right about one thing, there were thousands more like her out there. But now there were thousands of us too, armed with knowledge, connected by shared experience, and determined to fight back. My phone buzzed with a text from the Foundation team. "Just got a call from Microsoft. They want to fund a national workplace abuse hotline. They're offering $50 million. I smiled. The avalanche was still rolling, gathering force, sweeping away predators and the systems that protected them. 5 years later. I stand at the podium of the United Nations headquarters in New York, addressing the International Labor Organization's first global summit on workplace psychological safety. In the audience are representatives from 147 countries, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and thousands of survivors streaming online. 5 years ago, I began, a workplace predator named Victoria Pemberton was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Her conviction created what researchers now call the avalanche effect, a cascade of consequences that transformed how we think about workplace abuse globally. The statistics on the screen behind me tell the story. 15,000 workplace predators identified and terminated globally. $2.3 billion in settlements to abuse victims. 43 countries passing criminal workplace bullying laws. 85% reduction in reported workplace abuse at companies implementing Phoenix Foundation protocols. But this isn't about numbers, I continue. This is about lives reclaimed, careers rebuilt, and futures restored. The Phoenix Foundation now operates in 30 countries with an annual budget of $200 million. We've trained 50,000 HR professionals in predator identification, helped 100,000 victims document abuse, and created a global database of workplace predator tactics that's prevented countless others from suffering. Uncle Marcus, now the Foundation's chief legal officer, watches from the front row. At 73, he shows no signs of slowing down. "We're not done until every workplace is safe," he likes to say. The summit features speakers from around the world. There's Chen Wei from Shanghai, who exposed a bullying ring in China's tech industry. Maria Santos from Sao Paulo, whose documentation led to Brazil's groundbreaking workplace dignity laws. And David Okonkwo from Lagos, who created Africa's first workplace abuse survivor network. But the most powerful moment comes when we play a video compilation of survivors sharing their stories. Thousands of faces, all saying the same thing: I survived. I documented. I fought back. I won. Victoria Pemberton, now 5 years into her sentence, has become a case study in business schools worldwide, not as a leader to emulate, but as a warning of what happens when organizations enable predators. Her name has become synonymous with workplace abuse. "Don't be a Victoria" has entered the corporate lexicon. I've received letters from her over the years, each one attempting manipulation in different ways, seeking forgiveness, threatening revenge, pleading poverty. I don't read them anymore. They go straight to the Foundation's research team, who study them for manipulation patterns. The other Victoria victims have all thrived. James runs the compliance department for a major bank. Rachel's consulting firm went public last year. Priya is being groomed for CEO at a Fortune 500 company. Even Bradley, after years of therapy and volunteer work, has become an advocate for reforming workplace enablers. Career content creator Ben Askins has noticed a trend of revenge quitting, where young workers resign in spectacular fashion specifically to stick it to unfair bosses. But the Phoenix Foundation offers something better: justice through documentation, legal action, and systemic change. As I conclude my UN speech, I think about grandmother's note: no one has the right to dim your light. Burn them down if you have to. We didn't just burn down workplace predators, I tell the assembly. We illuminated an entire system that enabled them. And in that light, survivors around the world found their power. The standing ovation lasts 5 minutes. But I'm already thinking about the next fight. There are still predators out there, still toxic workplaces, still victims suffering in silence. My phone buzzes with a message from a new victim seeking help. A young analyst in Mumbai whose boss sounds exactly like Victoria. I forward it to our rapid response team, who will have documentation protocols and legal resources to them within an hour. The avalanche that started with one woman's downfall has become a global movement. Victoria thought she was building an empire of fear. Instead, she created an army of survivors who refused to let anyone else suffer what we endured. As I leave the UN building, I pass a newsstand. The headline reads: Phoenix Foundation celebrates 1 million survivor helped. Below it, a smaller story: Victoria Pemberton denied parole, victims testify she shows no remorse. I don't feel satisfaction or vindication anymore. Those emotions burned away years ago, replaced by something more powerful: purpose. Every workplace predator we expose, every victim we help, every toxic culture we transform is another victory, not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, aren't good enough, or should know their place. Victoria was wrong about human nature. Cruelty isn't inevitable, it's a choice. And so is courage. So is justice. So is rising from the ashes stronger than before. My phone rings. It's a reporter from the Financial Times. "Knight, we're doing a retrospective on the Victoria Pemberton case. What would you say to people currently experiencing workplace abuse?" I think for a moment. Document everything. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not alone. And when you're ready, when you have what you need, let the avalanche begin. Any regrets about how you handled it? Just one, I say. I wish I'd started documenting from day 1 instead of year 3. 7 years was too long to suffer. But suffering isn't noble, it's just suffering. The noble part is surviving, documenting, and making sure it never happens to anyone else. As I walk through Manhattan, my phone continues buzzing with messages from survivors worldwide. Each one a phoenix rising from their own ashes. Each one proof that Victoria and predators like her didn't win, they just showed us exactly what we're fighting against. The war against workplace abuse is far from over. But every day, more victims become survivors. More survivors become advocates. More advocates create change. The avalanche that started in a glass tower in Mesquite, Texas has circled the globe. And it's still rolling, still growing, still crushing workplace predators beneath its unstoppable weight. Victoria Pemberton thought she was untouchable. She thought wrong. And every workplace predator watching our movement grow should understand, we're coming for you next. Not with cruelty or revenge, but with documentation, determination, and the unshakable conviction that no one has the right to dim another person's light. The Phoenix Foundation's motto, displayed on screens behind me during every speech, says it all: from ashes to action. From victims to victors. From silence to justice. 7 years of torment. 5 years of justice. A lifetime of purpose. The avalanche continues.